Good evening. Daf Ayin Vav Amud Aleph, second line. Ganavik Dishu Akaf Tavach Machar, someone stole an ox or a sheep and made it hekdesh, and then he slaughtered it. You pay kefil, but did not pay 4 or 5. Amri. It makes sense on the slaughter, you don't pay the 4 or 5 to Tavach to hekdesh Katavach, because when you're slaughtering it, it belongs to hekdesh. It doesn't belong to the owner anymore. Allah hekdesh the hayav, but let him be hayav for making it hekdesh. I don't care how it became. Like, what's the problem? You kished it from the owners. What's the difference if you sold someone else or you gave it to hekdesh? You still hayav 4 or 5 for making it hekdesh, not necessarily for the slaughtering. Mahamani was right to Mishnah. Explain Rabbi Shimon. Opposing to Rabbi Shimon, when you have the responsibility for the animal, it stays in the ownership. Now the problem with that is, but the second part of the Braita, Mishnah said that it's Rabbi Shimon. Which means the first part of the Mishnah is not Rabbi Shimon, so that can't be the answer that it belonged to him. Gemara says, okay, Eliyahu was referring to Bekoche Kalim, right? Lighter kochim, right? There's different types of kochim. Shelamim, for example, it's a part of the lighter one, koche kalim. Koche kochim, the more holy ones are like hatat and olah. So koche kalim, according to Rabbi Salil, the amar koche kalim mamon ba'alim, who belongs to the owner. Ubeshuteh kamin belongs to them. Right, 1 second. Koche kochim, according to koche kochim, the higher kodesh animal, what would it be? Mishnah 4 or 5. At the time but the first case said, so you stole the animal, slaughtered it, and made it hekdesh. You pay 4 or 5. Right? So then the Gemara says if it makes a difference not on when he did it, or rather what he did on, lift look make that machloket. But when is it your patur from the 4 or 5 because it still belongs to the owner. But regarding 4 or 5, if you made it koche kashim, you pay 4 or 5 because you changed ownership. Gemara says, you have to change everything to make a difference. What the hell hekdesh you made it? With the kashilach mali you're going to ask me what's the difference, who you sold to, whether you sold to someone else or you sold it to the Bet HaMikdash. When you sell to a person, you're changing ownership physically. It was belonging to Reuven, the guy you stole from, and now you sold to Shimon. However, over here when you're making a kodesh, it was Reuven and it's still Reuven, but it does not change ownership, and therefore you're not since it does not change ownership from Reuven's property, you're not chayav 4 or 5. Next part of the Mishnah said Rabbi Shimon says that it depends on what type of animal is, who has the responsibility. Amri, what's going on? Obviously, Rabbi Shimon has to hold the concept that what's the difference who he's selling it to, whether or not it's the person or Shemaim. So then he should say the opposite. Regarding the animal that you're responsible for, you should be patur because that still belongs to the owner. If you make it a hekdesh animal that the owner does not have ownership anymore of or responsibility of, you should be hayav the mafkim because you took it away from him. Therefore, Rabbi Shimon saying something completely different. The Mishnah is saying as follows: when someone steals from a thief, you don't pay 2, you don't pay 4 or 5. Also, when someone steals a hekdesh animal from the owner, you're patur. Why? The pasuk says you're chayav extra knas of 2, 4, 5 when you stole from the house of the guy. Not from hekdesh's house. Rabbi Shimon adds on that. If you stole the animal that the owner had responsible for, you're chayav 4 or 5. Why? Because if the owner still had responsibility over it, of that hekdesh animal, you're stealing it from the house, even though it belonged additionally to hekdesh. But if he stole from the hekdesh animal from the guy's house that belongs completely to hekdesh and the guy has no responsibility over it, you're patur. You look at it in because that's not considered stealing it from the house of the man. Okay, michti. Rabbi Shimon, we see according to Rabbi Shimon, if you're slaughtering an animal that's not fit, meaning if you're not able to eat the animal, you're not chayav 4 or 5. If that's the case, then when you're slaughtering the animal out of the Bet HaMikdash, that's a slaughtering that's not fit. So how can he say that in the case where you slaughter a hekdesh animal, you're chayav 4 or 5? They give a couple answers. The first answer is Rabbi Shimon holds where you're slaughtering a non-mum animal inside the Bet HaMikdash for the owner. So Gemara says if you're slaughtering it for the owner, then if that's the case, then it's a good korban for him and it counts. That's kind of paying him back. You basically did an unofficial shlichut. You did a shliach. Not, it wasn't a good shlichut. Why? The blood spilled and never was on the mizbeach. Different answer. He did it not for the owner's sake, and therefore you didn't do it correctly, and therefore it was did it for yourself, and therefore it wasn't a good korban, and therefore you stole it. Basically says, you slaughter a mum animal outside the Bet HaMikdash. So it was a mum animal which should be slaughtered outside the Azara, but you slaughtered it not for the owner because he can't eat it. Because it wasn't a good korban. Sorry, because I had a mum. Okay, that's the question. According to Rabbi Yochanan, who says that it has to be a good shechita, means that you slaughtered a good animal inside the Bet HaMikdash. Does that make it mutar to eat? Not necessarily. But in order to make it good to eat, you need to have a good zrika, the blood thrown in the be'ach. Shakish holds that a good slaughter you need. This is the shechita making mutar? No. If it's an animal that makes a mum, in his case was a mum, just slaughtering that animal is not good enough. You have to have an animal redeemed for that animal to make it mutar. So how does that work to make it mutar for consumption? Rather, if he forgot to say, any blood that's eligible to be thrown, it's already considered thrown. Yani makes it mutar to eat, even if you didn't throw it yet. And also, any animal that stands to be redeemed, able to be redeemed, is able to be redeemed. It's considered already redeemed. Now we're going to spend the next amud talking about that. Any case of blood that's already to be thrown, it's considered thrown already. You're telling me right out. Rabbi Shimon says, "Yesh notar shehu mitamet tumat ochli." Notar is animal is a meat of an animal that was brought as a korban that is left overnight, or each korban has a different amount of time. What's considered left over, however long it's left over, a certain amount of time is considered notar. When it's notar, it's asur and it has to be burnt. I believe the korban pesach is overnight. Other korbanot are longer or shorter. So some notar has tumat ochlin, which means it can become tameh as a food. Now, in order to become tameh as food, it has to be considered food. Thing that's not considered food will not become tameh as food. What's considered food for a korban? It has to be eligible to be eaten. If it was never eligible to be eaten, it will not have tumat ochlin. So there's some notar that has tumat ochlin. Some there's notar that does not have tumat ochlin. Kesed, what's the case? If it stayed overnight before you threw the blood, right? If it stayed overnight before throwing the blood, it does not make it tumat ochlin because it was never thrown, and therefore it was never kosher. If said after throwing, it makes it tameh because it was kosher at one point, and therefore it can become tameh. The Gemara says, was before. Before it became fit for throwing. Yani, not necessarily throwing it. It was ra'ui to be thrown. It was able to be thrown. After you threw it, after it was ra'ui, after it was able to be thrown. Now, what does that mean? What is the case where it stayed overnight before it became able to be thrown? The was the case where there was no time in the day to throw the blood. You slaughtered it right before sunset. That's when it's not tameh for food because it was never had a time and period to be able to have zrika. It stayed overnight after it was able to be thrown, but it wasn't. There was enough time in there to throw it, but he didn't do it yet. But still, it still becomes tameh, even though it wasn't thrown. So what do we see from there? Any blood that was able to be thrown, any type of blood that was able to be thrown is considered thrown already.